Another day to consider the fundamental questions of man. And why do we want to do this? Because the idea is to make a model of the world so we can better understand the constraints and better understand our locus of control so that we can be the designers of our own story. Instead of life happening to us, we act on life. The question of who's the driver and who's being driven. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this in the terms of culture. Actually didn't do research to get an answer, which is kind of sad. But the question I had was, how does culture affect us and our thinking? I mean, because, I mean, I don't know, there's this idea, like, that's kind of individualistic, like revering great people over great societies. People don't say, wow, I liked how the Greek city-states, or Athens, promoted these ideals, which allowed the great philosophers to exist. Usually how it gets presented is, oh, these philosophers had some great ideas. Rarely do we see it a natural extension of the times. It's not like, oh, this was the idea and Plato built on it. It was more just Plato had the idea. Which, now that I see what's happening in my own world and like I'm talking about philosophy, I get sad because, you know, I'm like, wait, I see these ideas sprinkled throughout all of literature and the arts. And maybe I'm at the frontier of these ideas, but they're not necessarily my own. It's just a natural conclusion from what's presented to us and the fallacies we see with the old way of reasoning. And so my new idea on that is like, okay, maybe my idea is not unique, but to be fair, for ideas to really succeed, it's not just one person who has to say it. It's like everyone together. It's like playing a unique note on the drum, or a new note maybe. It takes a lot of people, or somewhat society, to play in resonance for the idea to catch on. So maybe the thing I'm playing is not unique, but I should play it, or I have to play it. I think it has merit, so that like other people around also play it, and slowly it grows in, noise, I guess, until it becomes like, adopted. It's just more and more people building on top of each other till the signal, which was once faint, becomes very constructed. Well, I can see how this could be a male reproductive organ if you want to see it that way. Whatever. But that's the idea. It's like maybe my signal is not unique, but it can be constructive, with other waves in harmony, and it create a bigger idea and become more mainstream. And it's actually interesting because I had this idea too, like um, on how we should act in understanding our locus of control. I think we often operate on the space of societies, or think about how to solve societal problems, but we don't exist on that plane. We exist on the individual plane. And so where our locus of control is, I think, is to, affect the state space around us and let it ripple outwards, Take advantage of the network effect. It's like I can flip the person next to me to X, Y, and Z, and he will do the same to another person. And there might be another guy on the other side of the world who's doing A, B, C, and he's affecting another guy, A, B, C. And maybe he's trying to convert XYZ guy, but XYZ guy converts this guy to XYZ. And so it's just a giant battle where the goal is to enforce or spread your worldview. And morality on others, I guess. I don't know, that was just an idea I had. But this is also a good idea, It's like, were Plato really, or Einstein really that great on their own, or did they exist in times that allowed those ideas to flourish, And obviously there's some ingenuity behind it. Anyhow, that's not really what I wanted to talk about. But I really wanted to talk about stability versus chaos. There's this word in physics like entropy, which gets associated to chaos, but the idea exists more like in stability, I think. At least in my mind. This is like thermodynamics definition of entropy. but people, I think, would consider this more to be stability in the proper sense of the word, because the idea is like the heat death of the universe, where all energy gets dispersed equally and there's no ability for any reaction to happen because there's no energy imbalance. Everything is completely stable. And people consider this the death because there's no action happening. It's like, you know, state space doesn't change. It just is, it's frozen in time. I think time loses all meaning when nothing changes, you know. It just like goes on for infinity. And so that's fine. But I was considering this in the lens. I guess that should be my translation word, so it doesn't look like I'm a complete idiot who's just rambling random connections. Will do. Uh, astronomy, astrological, physical, I don't know what the word is. A natural science perspective on sociology and psychology. A physical, applied mathematics. I don't know what the right word is, but that's basically, I'm just putting one lens in the form of another domain, and seeing what it teaches us about the other domain. Now, if you say the connection's not valid or not really established, that's fine. What I see more is like, the shape of an idea and, how reasoning exists. Like the architecture of reasoning in this one domain can also apply. Like, if we, would describe ideas as multidimensional spaces, we'd say, or shapes, it'd be like, okay, this one idea has a shape of it's this weird triangle diamond thing, and that triangle diamond can fit in the perspective of sociology and psychology. And my idea with stability and entropy is like, if we reach a perfect harmonious society where everyone is perfectly empathetic, is that like the sociological and psychological heat death of the universe, in a similar domain? It's like, if everything is so stable, there is no conflict, like, then have we just exterminated meaning from life? Which goes under the assumption that you need conflict for meaning, which I don't know if that's really true, if that assumption holds. But that's the idea, is like, if everyone is perfectly agreeable, then who would you have to complain about? It'd just be very, boring. It'd be hard to make meaning, you know, I guess. I don't know. I don't really know if that assumption holds that you need conflict for meaning. The idea is like, if we get rid of conflict, will we still have meaning? I don't know. That's a good question. But I was just thinking, like, sometimes, you know, you have the want to correct antisocial behavior to be more pro-social. And it's like, am I really just like killing the universe, you know, by doing this? It's just like, if everyone's just so agreeable and I have no problems with anyone, where's the contrast, you know, between people? Like, you kind of, some people exist, you know, like in art, you need dark space and white space to extract, you know, imagery. Um, and but like, if there's no contrast between people, you know, in terms of who's more agreeable and who's not, there's then everyone becomes very similar. It's like we've eliminated diversity. Because if we think about what pro-social behavior is, you know, going back to this idea of ideas, you know, spreading in society, is that they're resonant within society versus, and pro-social would also be like you're kind of playing to the average of society. You're like playing to the average. I'm blanking out. I don't know where I was going with this, but the idea that I wanted to convey, if my reasoning is not following, is that maybe antisocial behavior is inherently individualistic and self-expressionist. But then again, I don't really know if that's true. Because there can be lots of individualistic behavior that's not very individ. No, there can be behavior like selfish behavior, which is not pro-social, but it might not be individualistic. And one example of this is like being emo, you know? You're not really being pro-social. I mean, you are in some regards, you know? You're playing to a niche rather than the whole. But is it really an expression of an identity you created? Or is it one that's given? And for the most part, from what I've seen, it's mostly given, you know? If someone decides what the identity is. So that's an example of something that's antisocial, but not really individualistic. Um, I guess there's a lot of nuance when you have to talk talk about these things of uniqueness and merit, you know? And it really comes down to what values are being expressed. I don't know. I'm kind of confusing myself here. Just one thing I've noticed, especially with AI, is that it tends to agree with you on everything. You can give it anything and then say it has merit. Basically, you know, describing, you'd give it a thought and it'd give you a shape. You'd give it like, here are the lines I want to connect, and it would connect it and give you a shape. And we would say, but what shapes matter more than others? And that's a tricky question to say, you know? What gives something good, valid merit, you know? And that's not an easy question to answer. I guess here's the answer. Is what is the best answer is what can do the most with the least. You know? And what is fundamental? So we would give a shape, you know, like a cube, and it'd be like, oh, a cube can be used for A, B, C, D, E, and F. Or you could give it like a 7-dimensional quadrahedron, and it would be used only for C. And I think the idea that AI should favor is the one that can model things well. With the least amount of constructions, balancing form and function. And going back to the idea about ideas, um, there. See, I haven't really connected these, so I don't really like these. But that goes to another good point, which is like, you know, some people compartmentalize ideas. But I like this idea of form and function, you know, where things can be joined together. where things are connected, because that's a more efficient use of space. Man, this one really went off the rails in terms of topics. So it's hard to form a conclusion. These are all just ideas that I've had kind of lying around, but never knew how to connect. Yeah, and I'll just keep on going off that thread of randomness is, like why it's important to save space or, have a well-connected integrated brain instead of compartmentalized because we're limited on hardware. We don't have the capabilities of those giant giga data centers. So we try to be efficient and, you know, do the most with the least so we could have space for other things, just reuse same circuits to be predictive and find symmetry and find patterns. And this kind of relates to the idea, or reminds me of this idea I've had on time, where time feels like it goes by fast because we are limited on memory. I mean, we have the same brains. It's like as we're 24, as we're 80. I mean, at some point it stops, like the hardware becomes capped. And so, FIFO, first in, first out. Like things get popped off and it's strange because kids feel like a short amount of time is forever, while older people will blink as 8 years go by. Like a summer can last an eternity. Versus here, it's like, oh, blinking, your kids are already grown up. But I think it's just because here, there's stuff to put in, like the bucket's not full. So you can pour more stuff in. The days are remembered. Versus here, the bucket's already full. Like our hardware capacity's fixed, Evolution didn't really encourage having such a deep, you know, memory well. So if you have no memories of time, then they're all going to be conjoined into one thing, And so if you can be more efficient with your hardware, I think it's worth it because, you find better algorithms for running the same predictive models. You can execute better things, You free up space. Anyhow, long story short, things are confusing like they always are. I'm not sure how all these ideas fit together, but they're interesting talking points, I believe. Seeing how things are connected. Conclusion being, I don't know. This was just considering the constraint of if we, because, society values certain ideals, but should we consider what happens when we achieve those ideals? Like if everyone has everything they want, what happens next, Or I guess it's the idea of predictive modeling, you know, if we value X, Y, Z, how does that transform over time? And by seeing the finished product, you know, or just like one, you know, this is kind of my own view of things. If we put this into the model and get that as a result, what do we think of the result? And how would we change what we're putting in knowing the result, you know? And so I think it's worth asking this question of what does, you know, that golden city we dream of look like, and how should we let that affect our actions of the day, you know? Um, which I think is an interesting question. And ideas, I don't know if this idea is unique. I don't know if it matters if it's unique, because, like I was saying, I could just go off and just talk about weird things, which this might be a weird thing to talk about, but it's not really resonant with anyone, so it probably collapses. I think for an idea to be good, I think it has to be somewhat ununique, which goes against the idea of what, like, society has said what has merit. They value, you know, innovators, but no one values that fucking hobo off the side of the street rambling about how space monkeys are going to give you a. Well, I don't want to get that far. Space monkeys are building a spaceship in the core of the planets, you know, or in Earth's core. They're building a rocket ship. Has no resonance with people. Versus like Einstein's theories, I mean, you would not say they have resonance really with you, but for like the stuff that they're able to explain, it is very resonant, and it is a good descriptor of the universe, or so I've been told. But I think that's the tricky part, is like society says, well, it's not really special if it's not unique, but it also has to resonate with a lot of people. And so how do you balance that, you know? Innovation versus resonance, you know? Because, and you hear the whispers all throughout society of these ideas, and I feel like I just gotta play the drum with them till it gets louder and louder until things start flipping over and we get a new age, you know? Maybe more enlightened, and what that looks like at the end, I don't know. And I don't know if we'll get there, but it's worth for me talking about it so I can have a space to put this and don't have to always think of it in my brain, you know, free up some hardware, like I said. Anyway, that's all.